The ocean was silent except for the rhythmic splash of my arms. Then the silence broke with a surge beneath me, powerful and swift. The fin appeared, circling like death itself, and my blood ran cold. The final strike came before I could even scream. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start with today's shark attack story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are watching from. Click the like button, and let's get into the story. The sky over Camps Bay glowed in hues of fiery orange and deep lavender as the sun dipped closer to the horizon. Elizabeth Hartley stretched her arms, breathing in the salty tang of the sea breeze. It was a perfect evening, one that seemed to beckon her into the ocean's embrace. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore was soothing, a reminder of why she had chosen Cape Town as the backdrop for her latest travel article. She slipped off her sandals and walked barefoot across the cool, damp sand. The beach was nearly empty now, save for a few scattered tourists snapping photos of the sunset and a cluster of surfers paddling back to shore, their silhouettes outlined against the shimmering water. "You're not going in, are you?" A voice called out behind her. Elizabeth turned to see an elderly man perched on a rocky outcrop. He was weathered and wiry, his skin bronzed by years under the African sun. A fishing rod rested beside him, its line cast lazily into the waves. "I might," Elizabeth replied, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "The water looks too good to resist." The man frowned and shook his head. "Twilight isn't the time for swimming. Sharks, you know," she chuckled softly. "Sharks? Isn't that just a stereotype?" "No stereotype," he said, his tone grave. "It's their feeding time. Happens more often than you'd think." Elizabeth hesitated, her gaze shifting to the horizon, where the water glimmered like liquid gold. The idea of sharks seemed absurd. This was Camps Bay, not some untouched wilderness. She'd swum here before without incident, and besides, the allure of the ocean was irresistible. "I'll be careful," she assured him, waving as she stepped toward the shore. "You don't get careful with sharks," the man muttered, more to himself than to her. The cold water lapped at her feet as she waded in, its touch invigorating. She felt the tension of her long day melt away with each step into the surf. By the time she was waist deep, the pull of the current was steady but manageable. Elizabeth dove under a gentle wave, emerging into deeper water where the sea was calm and glassy. Floating on her back, she gazed up at the sky, watching as the first stars began to wink into existence. "This," she whispered to herself, "is what freedom feels like." She paddled leisurely, the beach receding in the distance. The world felt vast and empty, as if it existed only for her. A sudden splash nearby startled her, and she jerked upright in the water, scanning her surroundings. A pod of seals darted across the surface, their sleek forms agile and playful. Elizabeth smiled, her heart calming. She'd always found seals charming, their antics a reminder of the ocean's vibrancy. On the rocky outcrop, the old fisherman's attention sharpened. The seals' abrupt movements and the frenzy of seabirds circling above them painted a picture he'd seen too many times before. He rose from his seat, peering into the distance where Elizabeth's figure was barely a speck against the water. "Rady," he shouted, his voice carrying faintly over the waves. "Get out of there, now." Elizabeth didn't hear him. She was mesmerized by the seals, their energy infectious. But then, almost imperceptibly, their playfulness shifted to panic. The pod splintered, diving beneath the waves with unnatural urgency. The seabirds screeched overhead, scattering like autumn leaves caught in a gale. Elizabeth frowned. Something felt off. The water, once so welcoming, suddenly seemed darker, its depths unfathomable. She treaded water, her instincts whispering warnings she couldn't quite place. 100 yards away, a shadow moved beneath the surface. On shore, the fisherman dropped his rod and reached for his phone, dialing the lifeguard station. His hands shook as he spoke, We've got a swimmer in trouble, looks like a shark. Camps Bay, Southside. Send someone fast. Elizabeth felt the first bump against her leg like a firm shove, almost as if someone underwater had nudged her. She froze, her breath hitching. It could have been debris or a large fish, she reasoned, though her pulse quickened. A second bump came, harder this time, and she was thrown sideways, swallowing a mouthful of seawater as she scrambled to stay upright. "Hello?" she called out, her voice thin and trembling. "Is someone there?" The water around her erupted in froth as the dorsal fin broke the surface, slicing through the twilight like a blade. For one terrifying moment, she saw it sleek, immense, and silent. The great white shark turned slightly, revealing its pale underbelly and the curve of its black eye, cold and unyielding. "Oh my God," Elizabeth whispered, the words barely audible over her pounding heart. She kicked instinctively, trying to swim toward the shore, but the predator struck with terrifying speed. A force like a freight train slammed into her, jaws clamping onto her leg with crushing pressure. She screamed, the sound primal and raw, as pain exploded through her body. No, help me," she shrieked, thrashing wildly. The shark let go, circling back for another strike. Elizabeth struggled to keep her head above water, her legs searing with pain. The metallic scent of blood filled her nostrils, mingling with the salt of the sea. She clawed at the water, her strength ebbing as adrenaline coursed through her veins. On shore, the fishermen waved frantically at the lifeguards, who were sprinting toward their rescue boat. He pointed toward the bloodied patch of ocean, shouting instructions. "Hurry, she doesn't have much time." Elizabeth's vision blurred as she caught sight of the lifeguard boat speeding toward her, its motor roaring. She tried to wave but couldn't muster the strength. The shark returned, its dorsal fin slicing closer, its massive body moving with predatory precision. No, she whimpered, tears streaming down her face. The lifeguards reached her just as the shark lunged again, its jaws missing her by mere inches as one of them hauled her aboard. Elizabeth collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Hold on, ma'am," one of the lifeguards said, applying pressure to her shredded leg. "We've got you." Her vision flickered, the sounds of the ocean and the lifeguards' urgent voices blurring into a cacophony of chaos. The last thing she saw before succumbing to the darkness was the shark's fins slipping back beneath the waves, as silent and enigmatic as the twilight sky above. The water churned violently around Elizabeth, the weight of the ocean pressing on her as she struggled to make sense of what was happening. Her breaths came in sharp, shallow gasps, the cold bite of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, though her voice trembled. Stay calm. But the ocean didn't care about calm. It was vast, indifferent, and alive with dangers she couldn't see. Beneath her, a shadow lingered, large, deliberate, and terrifying in its silence. On shore, the fishermen's frantic gestures had finally drawn the attention of a lifeguard on duty. Jaden Daniels sprinted from his post, grabbing the radio strapped to his hip. "We've got an emergency," he barked, his voice tight with urgency. "Possible shark attack. Southside, near the rocks. I need the boat preps now." "Copy that," came the reply, static crackling between words. "On it." Jaden glanced out at the water, his stomach twisting as he spotted the unmistakable froth of blood spreading like ink in the waves. There was no time to waste. Elizabeth tried to swim toward the shore, but her movements were sluggish. The pain in her leg radiated with every kick, sharp and excruciating. She looked down, and though the water was darkening with blood, she caught a glimpse of the damage. Her calf was torn, flesh ragged and exposed. "Oh God," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Please, someone help me." Her scream was swallowed by the expanse of the ocean, but the shark wasn't done. The second strike came, sudden and brutal. This time, it clamped onto her thigh, dragging her beneath the surface with horrifying strength. The water turned red as Elizabeth flailed, desperate to free herself from the predator's jaws. She screamed underwater, bubbles escaping in frantic bursts. Her hands slapped against the shark's rough skin, her fists pounding futilely against its snout. It was like hitting stone, unyielding and indifferent. The shark's dark eye passed inches from hers, cold and alien, as if she were nothing more than prey. "Let go!" she screamed as her head broke the surface again, her lungs heaving for air. "Let go!" In the lifeguard station, Jaden and his team launched the rescue boat with practice speed. His colleague, Samira, gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "Do you see her?" Samira asked, scanning the water ahead. "Just head for the blood," Jaden said grimly, his binoculars fixed on the frothy, red-streaked waves. "She's out there, and she's running out of time." The engine roared as the boat skimmed over the waves, the beach growing smaller behind them. Jaden gripped the edge of the vessel, his heart pounding. "Hold on," he muttered under his breath. "We're coming." Elizabeth's strength was fading. Every motion felt slower, heavier, as though the ocean were conspiring against her. Her vision blurred, a combination of fear, salt water, and exhaustion. She felt the shark's grip release, only to realize it was circling again, its sleek dorsal fin cutting through the water with terrifying precision. "No, no, no," she whimpered, ticking weakly with her good leg. Her arms thrashed in desperation as she spotted the rescue boat in the distance. "Help me! Over here!" She waved frantically, though every movement sent bolts of pain shooting through her body. The shark's fin vanished for a moment, and Elizabeth froze, her breath catching. "Where is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The ocean was too quiet, too still. A sudden jolt from below sent her flying forward, her body skimming across the surface before she plunged back into the water. She shrieked, gasping for air, as the shark's snout struck her again. It wasn't a direct bite, it was testing her, assessing her weakness. "Damn you!" she cried, punching at the water in a futile attempt to scare it away. Her fist connected with nothing but the empty sea. "Almost there," Samira said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding in front of them. The boat closed the gap quickly, but it still felt agonizingly far. Jaden grabbed the rescue buoy, readying himself to jump. "There she is," he shouted. Elizabeth's figure bobbed in the waves, her arms flailing. Blood streaked the water around her, the sickening red unmistakable. "Get me close," Jaden ordered. Samira adjusted the throttle, and the boat slowed as it neared Elizabeth. Jaden leaned over the side, extending the buoy toward her. "Grab it," he yelled, his voice sharp and commanding. "Now, Elizabeth, grab it." Elizabeth reached out, her fingers brushing against the buoy just as the shark surged upward beneath her. Its dorsal fin grazed her side, and she screamed, her hand slipping from the buoy. "Take it," Jaden shouted again, his eyes locked on hers. With every ounce of willpower she had left, Elizabeth lunged forward, clutching the buoy with trembling hands. Jaden yanked her toward the boat, his muscles straining as he hauled her over the side. She collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Dot her," Jaden yelled. "Get us out of here," Samira shouted, slamming the throttle forward. The engine roared, and the boat sped toward the shore. Elizabeth lay on the deck, her breath ragged and uneven. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the white fiberglass of the boat. Jaden crouched beside her, applying pressure to her shredded leg with a towel. "You're safe now," he said, though his voice betrayed his own fear. "We've got you." Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused. "The shark, it was right there," she mumbled. "It wouldn't stop." "It's gone now," Jaden assured her, though he couldn't be certain. He glanced over his shoulder at the water, half expecting to see the fin following them. "You're going to be okay. Just hang in there." Her hand gripped his wrist weakly. It hurt so much, I know, he said softly, but you're alive. That's what matters. As the boat sped toward the shore, Elizabeth's vision blurred. The sounds of the engine, the shouts of the lifeguards, and the crash of the waves faded into a distant hum. The last thing she remembered before slipping into unconsciousness was Jaden's steady voice, grounding her in the chaos. "You're going to make it," he said firmly. "I promise." But even as he spoke, the great white shark disappeared into the depths, leaving only ripples behind, a silent, haunting reminder of its presence in the vast and indifferent ocean. The boat's engine roared against the crashing waves, but the distance to shore seemed impossibly vast. Elizabeth lay on the deck, her body trembling and pale as her blood soaked the floor beneath her. Jaden knelt beside her, his hands pressing firmly on her torn leg, desperate to staunch the bleeding. He could feel her body shivering violently beneath his touch, a combination of shock and the icy Atlantic waters. "Elizabeth, stay with me," he said, his voice firm but laced with urgency. "You're safe now, but I need you to stay awake." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. She stared at him as though struggling to comprehend his words. "That, he was so close," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I saw it. I thought I was going to die." "You didn't," Jaden said sharply, trying to keep her alert. "You're here, and we're getting you to help. Just hang on." "All right." Samira, steering the rescue boat, shot a glance back at them. "How's she doing?" "She's losing a lot of blood," Jaden called over the roar of the engine. "We need to get her to the paramedics now. Can we go faster?" "I'm already pushing it," Samira replied, her jaw tight. She scanned the water nervously, searching for any sign of the predator that had nearly claimed Elizabeth. "Just keep her alive, Jaden. We're almost there." Beneath the surface, the great white shark swam lazily in the boat's wake, its powerful body cutting effortlessly through the water. The scent of blood lingered in the currents, a visceral pull that kept the predator nearby. It wasn't attacking, but it wasn't retreating either. It lingered like a shadow, watching. Elizabeth moaned softly, her head rolling to one side. Jaden gently cupped her face, forcing her to focus on him. "Elizabeth, talk to me. Tell me something, anything. What's your favorite food? Your favorite color? Anything to keep you awake." She blinked slowly, her lips trembling. "Pasta," she murmured. I like pasta." "Good. That's good," Jaden said, nodding. "We'll get you some pasta as soon as you're better. Okay? You'll have the biggest plate of pasta you've ever seen." A weak laugh escaped her, though it turned into a wince as a fresh wave of pain shot through her leg. Her hand reached for his instinctively, gripping weakly. "It hurts," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It hurts so much." "I know," Jaden said, his voice softening. "I know it does, but you're strong, Elizabeth. You survived a shark attack. Do you know how incredible that is? You're a fighter." She shook her head slightly, her expression crumpling. I didn't fight. It was too strong. I couldn't stop it." "You didn't give up?" Jaden countered, his grip tightening on her hand. "That's what matters. You're here because you didn't give up." The shore came into view, the lights of the paramedics' truck blinking like a beacon. Samira exhaled sharply, her hands steady on the wheel as she maneuvered the boat toward the landing point. "We're almost there," she shouted over her shoulder. "Hold on, both of you." Elizabeth stirred weakly, her gaze drifting toward the shoreline. "Am I going to make it?" "You are," Jaden said firmly. "I promise you, you're going to make it." The boat slammed against the dock with a heavy thud, and Samira was the first to leap onto the pier, grabbing a line to secure the vessel. Two paramedics rushed forward, carrying a stretcher between them. "Her leg's been shredded," Jaden explained as he helped lift Elizabeth onto the stretcher. "She's lost a lot of blood. I've been applying pressure, but it's banned." "We'll take it from here," one of the paramedics said, his voice calm but efficient. He immediately wrapped a tourniquet around Elizabeth's upper thigh to stem the bleeding. Elizabeth whimpered as they lifted her onto the stretcher, her hands clutching weakly at Jaden's arm. Don't let go," she begged, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm right here," he said, walking alongside her as the paramedics wheeled her up the pier. "I'm not going anywhere." At the ambulance, the paramedics worked quickly, inserting IN4 and administering oxygen. Elizabeth's breathing was shallow, her face pale as she stared up at the night sky. The stars seemed impossibly distant, blurred by the tears pooling in her eyes. "Am I going to lose my leg?" she asked, her voice trembling. The paramedic closest to her hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "We're going to do everything we can to save it. Right now, the priority is getting you stable." Jaden crouched beside her, his hands still gripping hers. "Elizabeth, listen to me. You're alive. That's what matters. The doctors will take care of the rest." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't feel alive. I feel broken. Horizon, you saw how it followed us." Samira glanced toward the open water and then back at Jaden. "Yeah, like it wasn't done yet." The rescue boat remained docked, but its battered state bore evidence of the earlier chaos. Blood streaked the deck where Elizabeth had been, and the gouges on the side of the hull where the shark had rammed the boat told the rest of the story. "I don't like this," Jaden muttered as he grabbed a bucket and began to scrub the blood off the deck. "This wasn't just an attack, Sam. It was deliberate." Samira joined him, grabbing another bucket. "Sharks aren't deliberate, Jay. They're opportunistic predators. It was just doing what sharks do." "Then why didn't it stop after the first hit? Or the second?" Jaden demanded, his scrubbing becoming more aggressive. "It didn't just want her. It wanted Unders for everything." "Unders?" Samira paused, looking at him seriously. "You think this was personal? Like the shark has a vendetta?" Jaden shook his head, tossing the sponge back into the bucket with a frustrated sigh. "Yeah, not personal. Just calculated. That's what scares me." Before Samira could respond, the radio on the dashboard crackled to life. "Lifeguard Station 1, this is Marine Patrol. We're picking up reports of heightened shark activity near Camps Bay. Confirm status of swimmer rescue." Jaden grabbed the radio. "Marine Patrol, this is Lifeguard Station 1. Swimmer rescued and en route to the hospital. We confirm one great white shark in the area. Approximate length 3 to 4 meters. There was a pause on the line before the Marine Patrol officer responded. "Roger that, Lifeguard 1. Advise all personnel to avoid entering the water. Shark's behavior reported as aggressive. We're deploying a survey drone now." "Copy," Jaden replied, setting the radio down. Samira leaned against the console, her brow furrowed. "Drone or not, if that shark's lingering this close to shore, it's going to come into contact with someone. Then we need to keep everyone out of the water," Jaden said firmly. "Tourists, locals no exceptions. Good luck convincing anyone at Camps Bay to take sharks seriously," Samira muttered. The night deepened as Jaden and Samira worked to secure the beach. Signs were posted at every access point. "No swimming. Shark warning." Patrols ensured that late-night surfers and reckless thrill-seekers stayed out of the water. But even as they combed the shore, the unease didn't leave Jaden. He couldn't stop replaying the scene in his mind, Elizabeth's pale, terrified face as she clung to the buoy, the shark's fins slicing through the water with precision, the way it had circled the boat, relentless and unafraid. "What's on your mind?" Samira asked as they walked along the surf. Jaden hesitated before answering. The way it attacked, it wasn't random. Sharks don't usually ram boats like that, not unless they feel threatened. Samira glanced at him sideways. "You think it was trying to scare us off?" "Maybe," Jaden said. "Or maybe it was testing us. Either way, it's not normal behavior." They stopped walking as a faint splash echoed from further down the beach. Jaden's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing. "You hear that?" he asked. Samira nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight at her belt. She flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the surf. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle crash of waves. Then the splash came again, closer this time. "It's probably just a seal," Samira said, though her voice was tinged with doubt. Jaden shook his head. "Seals don't splash like that, not when they're this close to shore. Something's wrong." The flashlight's beam caught movement, a sleek, dark shape gliding just beneath the surface. Jaden's breath caught as he recognized the silhouette. "Samira, did back," he said quietly, his voice taut with urgency. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "It's the shark." The fin broke the surface, its curve unmistakable against the moonlit water. The great white moved with haunting grace, its body cutting through the shallows as though it were claiming the beach as its own. Samira took a step back, her hand tightening on the flashlight. "It's too close. It knows we're here," Jaden said, his voice low. "It's not hunting anymore, it's patrolling." The fin disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only ripples in its wake. Jaden and Samira stood frozen, their hearts pounding. "What do we do?" Samira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We stay out of its way," Jaden replied, "and we make damn sure no one else comes near this water." The next morning, the beach was eerily quiet. The usual throng of early swimmers and surfers was absent, their routines disrupted by the posted warnings. Jaden stood at the water's edge, scanning the horizon. The ocean was calm, its surface shimmering under the soft light of dawn. "You think it's gone?" Samira asked as she approached, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. Jaden shook his head. "It's not gone. It's just waiting." "For what?" she asked. He turned to face her, his expression grim. "For the next opportunity." Samira frowned, her gaze drifting to the waves. "Do you think this is going to end?" Jaden exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing at the sea. "With sharks, it's never about endings. It's about survival. For us _and_ them." As the sun climbed higher, its warmth dispelling the chill of the previous night, Jaden and Samira continued their patrol. But neither of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by tourists, not by locals, but by the silent predator that had turned their peaceful beach into a hunting ground. Somewhere out there, just beyond their sight, the shark waited, and the ocean, vast and indifferent, held its secrets close. The small, fluorescent-lit room at the Camps Bay Maritime Patrol office buzzed with low, tense energy. 2 lifeguards, a marine biologist, and an officer from the local maritime authority sat around a table cluttered with maps, reports, and grainy photographs of the shark-infested waters from earlier that week. Outside, the rhythmic crash of waves could be heard faintly through the thick windows, a constant reminder of the ocean's presence. Jaden sat stiffly, his arms crossed over his chest as he replayed the events of the past 24 hours in his mind. The image of Elizabeth's bloodied leg and the predatory precision of the great white shark had been seared into his memory. Across from him, Samira sipped her coffee, her eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. The room quieted as Captain Mark Barlow, a seasoned officer with the Maritime Patrol, entered with a clipboard under one arm and a weary expression etched onto his weathered face. He gestured for the group to settle as he took his seat at the head of the table. "All right," Barlow began, placing the clipboard on the table. "Let's go over the facts. This wasn't just another shark sighting, it was a full-blown attack. One of the most aggressive incidents we've had in years." Jaden leaned forward. "It wasn't just aggressive, Captain. It was calculated. That shark wasn't just feeding, it was testing boundaries." Barlow raised an eyebrow. "Calculated? Sharks are predators. Daniels, not masterminds." "I know that," Jaden said, his voice firm, "but I've been doing this job long enough to recognize normal behavior versus something different. That shark didn't just strike and move on. It circled, lingered, and even rammed our boat. It was territorial." Samira nodded, setting her cup down with a thud. "He's right. This wasn't just opportunistic hunting. It felt like it wanted to send a message: stay out of its water. The marine biologist, Dr. Sarah Langston, chimed in. Sharks are known to exhibit territorial behavior, especially larger species like the great white. However, she added, adjusting her glasses, what you're describing is unusual. Great whites are ambush predators. They attack swiftly and retreat, typically out of self-preservation. What you experienced might indicate it was defending a food source or even its young, though we rarely see maternal behavior in great whites. Jaden sighed. Whatever the reason, we've got a dangerous shark close to shore. That's the immediate concern. Barlow nodded, scribbling notes on his clipboard. What's the latest on the victim? Elizabeth Hartley, Samira replied. She made it through surgery last night. They managed to save her leg, but just barely. She's stable but in rough shape. Barlow tapped his pen on the table thoughtfully. And the shark? Jaden leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Still out there. We had multiple sightings near Camps Bay late last night. It's sticking close, likely drawn by the blood in the water and the seal activity. Drone footage? Barlow asked, looking at Dr. Langston. Langston opened her laptop, turning it to show the group. A grainy video played, captured by a surveillance drone. The shark's unmistakable silhouette moved just beneath the surface, its size and speed apparent even in the low-quality footage. This was taken at dawn, Langston said. Based on the dorsal fin's characteristics and estimated length, we're looking at a mature great white, likely 3.5 to 4 meters. Its behavior in the footage confirms what you described: it's lingering and circling, not actively hunting. Barlow exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. That's a problem. As the meeting adjourned, Barlow pulled Jaden aside. Daniels, I need your honest assessment. Can we keep the public safe? Or should we shut down the beach entirely? Jaden didn't hesitate. We need to shut it down, Captain. Signs won't stop surfers or swimmers who think they're invincible. This shark isn't going anywhere, and if we don't act, someone else is going to get hurt or worse. Barlow frowned. You know how the town council will react. Camps Bay thrives on tourism, especially the beach. Shutting it down could cost the local economy millions. Jaden squared his shoulders. Then let them get mad. Better that than burying someone's kid because we didn't take this seriously. Barlow studied him for a long moment before nodding. I'll push for a temporary closure. In the meantime, keep your team on high alert. Later that day, as Jaden and Samira walked along the beach posting additional warning signs, they were approached by a small group of reporters, their cameras and microphones already aimed. Jaden Daniels, can you confirm if the shark involved in yesterday's attack has been identified? One reporter asked, stepping forward. We've identified it as a mature great white shark, Jaden said, his tone measured. It's still in the area, and we're doing everything we can to ensure public safety. Another reporter jumped in. Is the beach being closed? Residents are saying the warnings aren't enough. Jaden exchanged a glance with Samira before responding. We've recommended a full closure to the town council. In the meantime, we're asking everyone to respect the warnings and stay out of the water. Some locals are calling this an overreaction, a third reporter pressed. How do you respond to critics who say sharks are just a natural part of the ecosystem? Jaden's eyes hardened. They are a natural part of the ecosystem, but when one starts behaving abnormally close to shore, it becomes a matter of public safety. This isn't about demonizing sharks, it's about preventing another attack. By evening, the tension along Camps Bay was palpable. Despite the warnings, a few surfers had ventured into the water, their silhouettes bobbing against the horizon. Jaden stood on the lifeguard tower, binoculars in hand, scanning for any sign of the shark. You think they'll ever listen? Samira asked from beside him, her voice tinged with frustration. Not until they see what we've seen, Jaden replied grimly. And by then, it'll be too late. As if on cue, a distant splash drew their attention. Jaden's heart clenched as he focused his binoculars on the water. A dorsal fin sliced through the waves, moving toward the surfers with terrifying speed. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing the radio. "Surfers in the water. Shark sighted heading straight for them. Get the boat ready now." Samira was already moving, racing down the tower to prep the rescue boat. Jaden's voice crackled over the loudspeakers. "All surfers, exit the water immediately. Shark in the area. Repeat, shark in the area." The surfers hesitated for a moment before the sight of the fin sent them paddling furiously toward shore. Jaden's pulse thundered as he watched the shark close the distance, its movements swift and deliberate. "Come on, move," he muttered, gripping the railing tightly. The first surfer reached the shallows, then the second. With the third lagged behind, panic evident in their frantic paddling. The shark surged forward, its dorsal fin disappearing just before it reached them. "Blow, blow, blow," Jaden yelled. The water erupted as the shark breached, its powerful jaws snapping shut mere inches from the surfer's board. The surfer tumbled into the water, flailing desperately as the shark circled back. The rescue boat roared into view, Samira at the helm. Jaden exhaled in relief as she hauled the terrified surfer aboard just as the shark struck the boat's hull with a resounding thud. The shark lingered for a moment, its dark form visible beneath the surface, before retreating into the depths. Back on shore, the rescued surfer collapsed onto the sand, shaking violently. Jaden crouched beside them, his voice calm but firm. "You're safe now. You're okay." The surfer looked up at him, their eyes wide with terror. "It came out of nowhere. It was massive. I thought I was dead." "You're alive," Jaden said, squeezing their shoulder. "But you've got to stay out of the water. That thing isn't done yet." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Camps Bay in shadow, Jaden knew their battle with the shark was far from over. The predator was still out there, and the ocean's calm surface belied the danger lurking beneath. The harsh glare of fluorescent lights illuminated the sterile hallways of Cape Town General Hospital. The faint beeping of monitors and the muffled hum of conversations filled the air. Elizabeth Hartley lay in a hospital bed, her body propped up by a series of carefully placed pillows. A thick bandage wrapped tightly around her leg, hiding the jagged wounds inflicted by the great white shark. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and gauze. Her eyes fluttered open, the world around her swimming into focus. The dull ache in her leg was a constant reminder of the previous day's horror. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, only the cold, dark water, the crushing pressure of the shark's jaws, and the metallic scent of her own blood. Then reality set in. A nurse entered, her footsteps soft. "Good evening, Miss Hartley," she said gently, her voice carrying a comforting lilt. "How are you feeling?" Elizabeth blinked at her, her throat dry. "Like I've been chewed up and spit out," she rasped. The nurse chuckled softly. "That's not far from the truth. You're very lucky to be here." "Lucky?" Elizabeth echoed, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I don't feel lucky." The nurse's expression softened. "I understand, but you're alive and that's what matters. You'll be starting physical therapy soon, and the doctors say your legs should recover with time. We've been monitoring your vitals, they're stable, which is a good sign." Elizabeth didn't respond. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the faint outlines of the city lights twinkled in the distance. She couldn't stop replaying the attack in her mind. The shark's cold, unblinking eye, the raw power of its movements, the helplessness she'd felt as it dragged her beneath the waves. The door creaked open, and a familiar voice cut through her thoughts. "Hey, Elizabeth." She turned her head to see Jaden standing awkwardly in the doorway, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. His lifeguard uniform was gone, replaced by a simple t-shirt and jeans. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with dark circles. "I wasn't sure if you'd be up for visitors," he said, stepping inside, "but I thought I'd check in." Elizabeth managed a weak smile. "You came all the way here for me? You kidding?" Jaden said, setting the flowers on the bedside table. After what you went through, it's the least I could do. She motioned for him to sit in the chair beside her bed. Thanks for everything. I mean, for saving me. Chayden waved her words away, though a flicker of emotion crossed his face. You don't have to thank me. That's my job. Elizabeth's eyes glistened with unshed tears. It's more than a job. You put yourself in danger for me. You and your team. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Chayden shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. You're tougher than you think, Elizabeth. You fought to stay alive out there. That wasn't all us. She let out a bitter laugh. Duff? I was terrified. I couldn't fight it, I just survived. And that's enough, Chayden said firmly, meeting her eyes. You did what you had to do and you lived. That's what matters. As they talked, a knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Sarah Langston, the marine biologist who had been analyzing the attack, entered with a clipboard. She nodded politely at Chayden before turning her attention to Elizabeth. Ms. Hartley, Dr. Langston said, her tone professional but kind. I'm Sarah Langston. I've been working with the lifeguards and maritime authorities on shark activity in the area. I wanted to check on you and, is you're up for it, ask a few questions about the attack. Elizabeth hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. The thought of reliving the ordeal made her stomach churn, but she nodded. Okay. Dr. Langston pulled up a chair, flipping through her notes. I know this might be difficult, but any details you can provide could help us understand the shark's behavior. Can you describe what happened when it first struck? Elizabeth's throat tightened. Then, it hit me from the side, she began, her voice shaky. I didn't even see it coming. 1 minute, I was floating, and the next, it was like being hit by a truck. It grabbed my leg, pulled me under. The force was she stopped, swallowing hard. It was overwhelming. Dr. Langston nodded, jotting notes. Did you notice anything unusual in the water before the attack? Seals? This? Or any other marine life acting oddly? There were seals, Elizabeth said, her brow furrowing. At first, they were playing nearby, but then they started acting strange. They scattered suddenly, like they knew something was coming. That's consistent with what we've seen, Langston said, her tone thoughtful. Sharks often hunt near seals, and their behavior can be an early warning sign. Did the shark release you after the first bite? Elizabeth nodded slowly. Yes, but it came back. It wasn't just one attack, it felt like it was testing me, circling and striking again. I think it wanted to wear me down. Langston exchanged a glance with Chayden, who leaned forward. That's what we've been saying, he said. This shark wasn't just feeding, it was territorial. It didn't stop at the usual ambush behavior. Langston tapped her pen against the clipboard. This kind of behavior is rare, but not unheard of. Great whites are highly intelligent, and in some cases, they've shown signs of defending what they see as their hunting grounds. Elizabeth's hands trembled. So, it wasn't random? No, Langston admitted. But that doesn't make it personal. It's important to remember that the shark was targeting you as an individual, it was acting on instinct. Elizabeth gave a bitter laugh. That's not exactly comforting. Langston offered a sympathetic smile. I understand, but knowledge can be a powerful tool for healing. Knowing why it happened might help you process the trauma. After Langston left, the room fell into a heavy silence. Chayden watched Elizabeth closely, sensing the weight of her emotions. You okay? He asked gently. Elizabeth shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, I'm not okay. I don't know if I'll ever be okay. Chayden reached out, hesitating for a moment before placing a comforting hand on hers. It's going to take time. No one expects you to bounce back from something like this overnight. I don't even know who I am anymore, she said, her voice cracking. I've always been strong, independent, but now I feel broken. You're not broken, Chayden said firmly. You're alive, Elizabeth. That makes you stronger than you realize. Surviving that, It's not weakness, it's resilience. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. What if I can't go back to the ocean? What if I'm too afraid? Jaden smiled faintly. Then you take it one step at a time. You don't have to go back tomorrow or next week or even next year. But when you're ready, the ocean will still be there. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her tears slowing. Thank you, Jaden, for everything. He squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. What? When you're ready to face the ocean again, let me know. I'll be there to make sure you're safe. A small, genuine smile tugged at her lips. Deal. As the night deepened, Elizabeth drifted into a restless sleep, the hum of hospital monitors filling the room. Jaden stayed for a while longer, sitting silently by her side. The scars on her body were visible, but he knew the deeper wounds, the ones in her mind and heart, would take longer to heal. Outside, the city lights glittered against the dark sky. Beyond them, the ocean stretched into infinity, vast and indifferent. Somewhere in its depths, the great white shark swam, a reminder of the raw power of nature and the resilience of those who faced it head-on. The sharp flash of cameras lit up the hospital's otherwise dim lobby as reporters jostled for space near the front desk. The clamor of voices overlapped, each one trying to shout over the other to get their questions answered. Can you confirm the victim's condition? Is she willing to give an interview? How dangerous is the shark that attacked her? Elizabeth Hartley sat in her hospital bed, staring blankly at the television mounted to the wall. The local news played a video of the shoreline at Camps Bay, where warning signs had been posted in bright, unmistakable red. Shark sighting water closed until further notice. The anchor's voice carried through the room, detached but authoritative. Marine authorities have confirmed that a great white shark, estimated to be between 3 and 4 meters, was responsible for the attack on 38-year-old Elizabeth Hartley. The victim, a travel writer, was swimming alone at twilight when the shark struck. Experts are calling this one of the most aggressive shark incidents in recent history. Elizabeth sighed, rubbing her temples. The words _victim_ and _incident_ grated against her nerves. Was that all she was now? The headline? Knock, knock, a voice said from the doorway. It was Jaden, holding 2 styrofoam cups of coffee. Thought you could use some caffeine. Elizabeth gestured weakly toward the television. You've seen it, right? I'm practically a reality show now. Jaden set the coffee on the tray beside her bed and glanced at the screen. A grainy photo of Elizabeth, likely taken from her social media, appeared next to a stock image of a great white shark. The caption read, _shark attack survivor speaks out, _ they're relentless, she admitted, sitting down in the chair beside her bed. But they'll move on eventually. They always do. Elizabeth shook her head. I'm not so sure. They're camped out downstairs like vultures. I can't even think about stepping outside. Jaden leaned back, crossing his arms. They want their story, and they're going to do whatever it takes to get it. The question is, do you want to give it to them? Elizabeth hesitated, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her blanket. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell them to leave me the hell alone. But then I think about how many people might not realize how dangerous the water can be. If my story could help someone, Jaden nodded slowly, you'd be turning something awful into something meaningful. But it's your call, Elizabeth. No one can force you to do this. She stared at the coffee cup, her reflection distorted in its rippling surface. I don't want to become this shark attack lady. I'm a writer, Jaden. I spent my life traveling the world, telling other people's stories. And now, suddenly, I'm the story. Jaden gave her a sympathetic smile. You're not just a story, Elizabeth. You're a survivor. And that means you get to control the narrative. The next morning, Elizabeth woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She groaned, reaching for it with one hand while rubbing the sleep from her eyes with the other. Her inbox was flooded with messages, journalists requesting interviews, strangers offering their support, and a few messages that made her stomach churn. "It's just a shark, Rady. Get over it. You're ruining the beach for everyone." She sighed, tossing the phone aside. The weight of the public's attention felt suffocating. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Sarah Langston, the marine biologist who had visited her earlier in the week. "Morning, Elizabeth," Sarah said, stepping inside with a warm smile. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly," Elizabeth replied, "I've been better." Sarah nodded, pulling up a chair. "I wanted to check in. I've been doing some media appearances, answering questions about the shark and the attack. I've tried to keep the focus on the science, on understanding these animals rather than fearing them." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "How's that going?" Sarah chuckled. "Not great. Fear sells better than understanding, unfortunately. But that's why I'm here. I was hoping you might consider joining me for an interview. We could set the record straight together." Elizabeth frowned. "You think that would help?" "I do," Sarah said earnestly. "Right now, the media is framing this as some kind of Jaws-style horror story. They're making the shark out to be a bloodthirsty monster. But we both know that's not the full picture. If you're willing to share your experience, your _real experience, it could shift the conversation." Elizabeth hesitated, her mind racing. The thought of speaking to a room full of journalists made her stomach twist. But Sarah's words resonated with her. She didn't want her story to fuel fear or sensationalism. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll do it. But only if we focus on the facts." Sarah smiled. "That's all I'm asking." Later that afternoon, Elizabeth found herself seated in front of a microphone in a small press room at the hospital. A modest group of reporters filled the space, their cameras and notepads ready. Sarah sat beside her, projecting a calm, reassuring presence. The room buzzed with whispered speculation as Elizabeth adjusted the microphone. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "My name is Elizabeth Hartley, and I'm here to talk about what happened to me at Kemps Bay. I know there's been a lot of speculation and misinformation, so I want to set the record straight." The room fell silent, the reporters leaning forward. "I was attacked by a great white shark while swimming alone at twilight," Elizabeth continued. "It was the most terrifying experience of my life, and it's something I'll carry with me forever. But I want to make one thing clear. This shark wasn't a monster. It wasn't evil. It was acting on instinct." A hand shot up in the audience. "Miss Hartley, do you blame the shark for what happened?" Elizabeth hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "No, I don't blame the shark. I made the decision to swim at a time when sharks are most active. I didn't know the risks, but I should have." Another reporter spoke up. "How do you respond to people who say the beach closures are an overreaction?" Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "I respond by saying they weren't there. They didn't feel the power of that animal or see how close I came to dying. The closures aren't about punishing anyone, they're about protecting people." Sarah leaned into her microphone. "And they're about understanding the shark's behavior. Great whites are apex predators, and their presence in our waters is a sign of a healthy ecosystem. But with that comes responsibility to respect their space and understand their patterns." The questions continued, ranging from Elizabeth's personal trauma to broader discussions about marine conservation. By the time the press conference ended, Elizabeth felt drained but strangely empowered. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time since the attack, she felt a sense of control over her story. Back in her hospital room, Elizabeth slumped onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. Jaden appeared in the doorway, a small smile on his face. "I watched the whole thing," he said, holding up his phone. "You were amazing." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "I don't know about amazing, but it felt good to say what I needed to say." Jaden stepped inside, pulling a chair closer to her bed. "You did more than that. You turned something terrifying into something meaningful." "That's not easy, Elizabeth." She looked out the window, where the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. "It's strange," she said softly. "I used to think of the ocean as this perfect, peaceful place. Now I see it differently. It's still beautiful, but it's dangerous too." Jaden nodded. "It's both, and maybe that's what makes it so powerful." Elizabeth turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think I'll ever go back? To the ocean?" Jaden asked. She nodded. "To the water, to swimming, to feeling free." Jaden's gaze was steady. "I think you will. It might take time, but you'll get there. And when you do, you'll be stronger for it." Elizabeth smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through her exhaustion. For the first time since the attack, she felt a flicker of hope, a tiny, fragile ember of resilience. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The familiar sound of waves crashing against the shore greeted Elizabeth as she stepped out of the car and onto the sandy parking lot at Camps Bay. The salty tang of the sea breeze hit her, carrying with it a swirl of emotions: nostalgia, unease, and a twinge of longing. The golden sun hummed low in the sky, casting an amber glow over the beach. It was the first time she had returned since the attack. Elizabeth leaned on her cane, her left leg still weak from months of physical therapy. Each step was deliberate, her weight shifting carefully to avoid overexerting the injured limb. Her therapist had assured her she was making excellent progress, but the scars, both physical and emotional, still throbbed in quiet moments. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You can do this," she whispered. "It's just a beach, just water. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Jaden's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood by the car, his hands in his pockets, watching her with a mix of concern and encouragement. Elizabeth glanced over her shoulder, offering a faint smile. "Not really, but I'm here." Jaden nodded, stepping beside her. "That's half the battle." The two began walking toward the shore, the sand shifting beneath their feet. Despite the peaceful scene, children laughing, couples strolling hand in hand, surfers paddling out into the waves, Elizabeth couldn't shake the tension coiled in her chest. Every step closer to the water felt like a confrontation with a ghost. As they reached the edge of the sand, Elizabeth paused. The ocean stretched out before her, vast and indifferent, its surface glittering under the fading sunlight. She could see the spot where it had happened, marked in her mind like a scar on the landscape. Jaden followed her gaze. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about how different it looks," she said softly. "And how it feels the same." "Different how?" "Before, it felt inviting, like the ocean wanted me there. Now," she hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cane. "Now it feels like it doesn't care if I'm here or not." Jaden nodded, understanding. The ocean isn't cruel or kind. It just is. That's what makes it beautiful and dangerous. Elizabeth turned to him. "Do you ever get scared? I mean, being out there every day, knowing what's under the surface." "All the time," he admitted. "But fear keeps me sharp. It reminds me to respect the water. And if you can respect it, you can also trust yourself to handle it." She let his words settle, her gaze returning to the waves. A small pod of dolphins broke the surface in the distance, their sleek forms playful and carefree. She smiled faintly. "They look so free," she murmured. "They are," Jaden said. "And you can be too." One step at a time, they continued down the beach until they reached a quiet spot away from the crowds. Elizabeth eased herself onto a rock, letting the cane rest beside her. Jaden crouched nearby, picking up a small piece of driftwood and turning it over in his hands. "Do you want to go in?" he asked after a long silence. Elizabeth's heart skipped at the thought. The idea of stepping into the water, feeling it lap against her skin, was both alluring and terrifying. She shook her head. "Not yet. I think I just need to sit here for a while." Jaden nodded, respecting her pace. "Take all the time you need." They sat together in comfortable silence, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. Elizabeth's mind drifted back to that day, to the moment she had felt the shark's presence beneath her. The memory was vivid. the pressure of its body against hers, the cold water pulling her under, the primal fear that had seized her. "I still see it sometimes," she said quietly. "In my dreams. That moment when it came back for me." Jaden glanced at her. "Do the dreams ever end differently?" "No," she exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping. "It's always the same. It always wins." Jaden set the driftwood down and turned to face her fully. "Then maybe it's time to change the story." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "How do you rewrite something that already happened?" "You don't rewrite it," he said, "but you can change how it ends. That shark didn't win, Elizabeth. You're here. You survived." She met his gaze, searching for the strength he seemed to see in her. "Sometimes I don't feel like I survived. I feel like I left part of myself out there in the water." "Maybe you did," he said, his voice gentle. "But you've also built something new since then. That's the part of you that's sitting here, facing this, even when it's hard." As the sun dipped lower, the tide crept closer, the waves lapping at the edge of Elizabeth's rock. She reached down tentatively, letting her fingers touch the water. It was cold and familiar, sending a shiver up her spine. Jaden watched her, his expression unreadable. "How does it feel?" She hesitated before answering. "Not as scary as I thought." He smiled. "Dance's start." Encouraged by her small step, Elizabeth removed her shoes and rolled up her pants. She stood slowly, her weight shifting cautiously on her injured leg. Jaden stood too, ready to help if she needed him. "I think I want to try," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. Jaden nodded. "I'll be right here." She took a tentative step into the water, the cold biting at her skin. Her breath hitched, but she forced herself to keep moving. Another step, then another until the water reached her knees. She paused, her body tense. "Close your eyes," Jaden said from the shore. "What?" "Close your eyes," he repeated. "Feel the water. Don't think about the shark or the attack. Just feel it." Elizabeth hesitated, then closed her eyes. The sound of the waves surrounded her, soothing and rhythmic. The water moved gently around her legs, its touch grounding her. "It's just water," she whispered, repeating the mantra to herself. "It's just water." When she opened her eyes, she felt a small flicker of triumph. She turned back to Jaden, who was watching her with a proud smile. "You did it," he said. "I did," she replied, her voice steadier now. As they walked back to the car, Elizabeth felt lighter, as if a small piece of the weight she had been carrying had been left behind on the shore. She knew she still had a long way to go, but for the first time, she believed she could get there. Before getting into the car, she turned to look at the ocean one last time. The waves rolled in and out, unconcerned with her presence. She smiled faintly. "I'll be back," she whispered, as much to herself as to the water. "On my terms." Elizabeth Hartley sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the small clock on the nightstand. The second hand tipped steadily, marking time, but her mind refused to settle. It had been weeks since she'd returned to Camps Bay, dipped her toes back into the ocean, and taken what she thought was a step forward. But progress wasn't linear, and some nights, the memories hit her with the force of a wave. She rubbed her temples and exhaled deeply. The nightmares had started again, vivid and relentless. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the water, feeling the immense weight of the shark dragging her down. She could hear the muffled roar of her own screams beneath the surface, feel the sharp, tearing pain in her leg. When the memories got too loud, Elizabeth would try to distract herself, write a paragraph for her memoir, organize her cluttered desk, or pace the length of her small apartment. But tonight, none of it was working. The walls felt like they were closing in. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She glanced at the screen and saw Jaden's name. "You up?" The message read. Elizabeth hesitated before typing back. "Yeah, can't sleep." The reply came almost instantly. "Meet me at the pier." She frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight, but the thought of getting out of her apartment even for a little while was appealing. She grabbed a hoodie, slipped into her sneakers, and left without overthinking it. The pier was quiet, lit by the soft glow of a few street lamps. Jaden leaned against the railing, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. When he saw Elizabeth approaching, he straightened and waved. "You look like you could use some fresh air," he said as she joined him. She gave a weak smile. "Is it that obvious?" Jaden nodded toward the ocean. "I figured you might need a change of scenery. Something about the sound of the waves helps, doesn't it?" Elizabeth stared out at the dark water. The ocean had always been a source of peace for her before the attack, a place where she could lose herself and feel free. Now it was complicated, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Other times, it just reminds me of everything I'm trying to forget." Jaden leaned on the railing beside her. "That's the thing about trauma. It doesn't just go away because you want it to. You have to face it, piece by piece." Elizabeth sighed. "That's what why keep telling me in therapy. But how do you face something that lives in your head? It's not like I can punch the shark back." Jaden chuckled softly. "No, but you can challenge the fear it left behind. And from what I've seen, you're already doing that." "Am I?" Elizabeth asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "Most days, it feels like I'm just surviving, not living." Jaden turned to her, his expression serious. "Surviving is living. Don't sell yourself short. The fact that you're here, that you're even talking about this, means you're doing the work." The conversation shifted as they walked along the pier, talking about lighter things: Jaden's busy days at the lifeguard station, Elizabeth's slow progress on her memoir. The tension in her chest eased as she listened to his stories, grateful for the distraction. But as they turned back toward the car, Jaden stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing. Elizabeth followed his line of sight. In the distance, under the moonlight, a small boat bobbed on the waves. Its occupants, barely visible, appeared to be casting nets. "Late-night fishermen?" she asked. Jaden frowned. "They're too close to the shark warning zone. And fishing at night around here? That's just asking for trouble." Before Elizabeth could respond, Jaden was already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling it in. We can't let them stay out there." The next morning, Elizabeth sat in her therapist's office, her leg propped up on a cushioned stool. Dr. Anita Mbeki was a calm, soft-spoken woman with a way of asking questions that cut through Elizabeth's defenses without feeling intrusive. "You mentioned the nightmares are back," Dr. Mbeki said, jotting down a note. "How are you handling them?" Elizabeth shrugged. "Not great. I usually wake up in a panic. Sometimes I try to write, but it doesn't always help. And when the memories come up during the day, I try to push them down, I guess," Elizabeth admitted. "But they don't stay down for long." Dr. Mbeki set her pen down and leaned forward. "Elizabeth, avoiding the memories gives them power. They thrive in the dark. What would happen if you brought them into the light?" Elizabeth frowned. "Dimin, think about them on purpose? That sounds like a nightmare in itself." "It's not about reliving the trauma," Dr. Mbeki explained. "It's about processing it. You've been through something extraordinary, something terrifying, but it doesn't define you. Facing those memories can help you take back control." Elizabeth considered her words, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "How do I even start?" "We'll do it together," Dr. Mbeki said. "Start small. Can you tell me one thing you remember about the attack? Not the pain or the fear, something neutral. And detail." Elizabeth closed her eyes, her breath steadying as she reached back into the memory. "The water," she said finally. "I remember how cold it was. I've swum in the ocean 100 times. But that day, it felt colder, sharper." Dr. Mbeki nodded. "Good. What else?" "The seals," Elizabeth continued, her voice soft. "They were so graceful at first, but then they panicked. It was like they knew something I didn't. The session continued, with Dr. Mbeki guiding Elizabeth through the memory in fragments. By the end, Elizabeth felt drained but lighter, as if a small part of the weight had been lifted. That evening, Elizabeth sat at her desk, staring at the blank document on her laptop. Her memoir was supposed to be a way to process the trauma, but every time she tried to write, the words felt hollow. This time, though, she thought about what Dr. Mbeki had said. She didn't have to relive the fear, she just had to tell the truth. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before finally typing. The water was colder than I expected. Sharper, like it was trying to warn me. I floated on my back, staring at the sky, unaware of the shadow rising beneath me. If I had known, would I have done anything differently? The words flowed, hesitant at first but gaining momentum as she let herself write freely. Hours passed before she finally leaned back, reading over the pages. For the first time, she felt like she was capturing the experience, not just the horror, but the details that made it real. Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth continued to chip away at her memoir, attend therapy sessions, and challenge herself in small ways. She visited the beach more often, sometimes just sitting on the sand, other times wading into the shallows with Jaden by her side. Each visit felt like a victory, no matter how small. One afternoon, as she walked along the shore, a child ran up to her, holding a small seashell. "Are you the shark lady?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Elizabeth laughed, startled by the question. "I guess I am. Who told you that?" "My dad," the boy said, pointing to a man farther down the beach. "He said you fought a shark and won." Elizabeth smiled, crouching down to the boy's level. "Well, I didn't exactly win, but I survived. And that's the most important thing." The boy grinned, holding out the seashell. "You can have this. For good luck." "Thank you," Elizabeth said, taking the shell. "I'll keep it safe." That night, Elizabeth sat on her balcony, the seashell resting on the table beside her laptop. The ocean stretched out in the distance, its surface calm and shimmering under the moonlight. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months, not because the fear was gone, but because she was learning to live with it. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jaden. "How's the writing going?" Elizabeth smiled as she typed back. "Better than I expected. Thanks for pushing me." His reply came quickly. "You're doing all the hard work. Proud of you." Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, letting the sound of the waves fill the silence. For the first time since the attack, she felt like she was finding her way back to herself. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't over, but she was moving forward, one step at a time. The sun was barely cresting the horizon when Elizabeth Hartley stood at the edge of the dock, her feet planted firmly on the weathered wood beneath her. The cool morning air carried the tang of salt water, its scent as familiar to her now as the sound of her own heartbeat. She hadn't been to the ocean in weeks, but the pull was there, strong, relentless, impossible to ignore. The ocean stretched out before her, vast and quiet, the early light painting it in shades of blue and gold. The memory still lingered in the back of her mind, faint and haunting. For the first time in months, Elizabeth didn't feel the suffocating weight of fear. She had spent so long running from the attack, trying to escape it in any way she could. But now, standing here, she knew the truth. Running would never help her heal. She had to face it. She had to face this. "Hey, you made it," Jaden said, breaking into her thoughts. He was standing behind her now, a light breeze ruffling his hair as he adjusted the straps of a small boat tied to the dock. Elizabeth turned, offering him a small smile. "I did. It's different than I expected." Jaden gave her a warm smile in return, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "How so?" "It feels still," she said, looking out over the water. "Quiet. I guess I thought I'd feel more, overwhelmed, but it's just calm." Jaden nodded. "You've changed, Elizabeth. The ocean's always been there, it's just you who needed to change." Now you're ready to meet it on your own terms. The last few months had been a journey, and it had taken more than just physical therapy and time spent in therapy sessions to get her to this point. It had taken grit. It had taken moments of vulnerability, of sitting in the middle of her fears, facing them head on, and realizing that they didn't define her. She had learned to write her truth into existence, the good and the bad. She had learned to live with the memories, to acknowledge them without letting them control her. Elizabeth reached down, running her fingers lightly over the dock's surface, feeling the rough texture of the wood. "I didn't think I'd get here," she said quietly. "Back here, I mean. I thought I'd be too scared to come back." Jaden chuckled softly. "You don't have to be brave all the time, you know. It's okay to be scared. But you're still here. That counts for a lot." Elizabeth nodded, though the weight of her next words lingered in the air. "I think I'm ready to swim again." Jaden's eyes softened with understanding, his voice gentle but encouraging. "I think you are too. But no rush. You take it at your own pace. We're not in any hurry." She smiled at him, appreciative of the fact that, in his presence, there was no pressure, no expectation to rush or push herself further than she was ready for. Jaden had been her steady anchor through this whole ordeal, always offering support when she felt herself drifting too far into doubt. "I'm not going in yet," she said, shaking her head slightly. "But I want to take the boat out. Just be on the water." Jaden's expression softened with approval. "That's a good start." They spent the next hour preparing the small boat, Jaden showing Elizabeth how to handle the oars and explaining the best way to balance herself while paddling. As they glided out into the calm waters, the city faded away behind them, and Elizabeth allowed herself to breathe deeply, taking in the peacefulness of the scene. She had spent so much time in the past months worrying about everything: the attack, the trauma, the endless cycle of fear. But now, on the water, she could finally understand what Jaden had been trying to tell her. It wasn't about conquering the ocean. It was about finding a way to coexist with it. It was about understanding that sometimes peace came not from trying to escape your fears, but from acknowledging them. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they paddled further out. The water shimmered, and Elizabeth marveled at how the light seemed to dance on the surface, as if the ocean itself was alive. A few seabirds soared overhead, their calls echoing in the silence around them. After a while, they stopped paddling, letting the boat drift gently in the open water. Elizabeth leaned back, her hands resting on the sides of the boat, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The vast expanse of ocean stretched out before her, and for the first time it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like a homecoming, as though she had found her place again. Jaden turned to her, his voice low but serious. "How are you feeling?" Elizabeth exhaled slowly, a sense of peace settling over her. "I'm okay. Better than I thought I would be." Jaden nodded, his gaze drifting out over the water. "You know, a lot of people wouldn't even have gotten this far. What you've done, it's not easy. Most people just want to forget. But you're doing the hard work, Elizabeth. You're facing it head on." Elizabeth looked at him, grateful for his words. "It's still hard," she admitted, "but I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore. I'm finally learning how to float." Jaden smiled, a look of quiet pride in his eyes. "That's the hardest part, knowing you can float when the waves come." As they sat there in the boat, the afternoon drifted by in a haze of tranquility. Elizabeth's mind felt clear, free of the constant noise of anxiety that had once clouded everything. She could almost feel the memories receding into the background, no longer a constant weight but a part of her past. They were there, yes, but they didn't have to define her. A few hours later, as the light began to fade, Jaden suggested they head back to shore. Elizabeth agreed, and they paddled in silence, the soft splashing of the oars marking their return. The gentle rhythm of the water felt like a lullaby, and as they neared the dock, Elizabeth realized just how far she had come. She stepped out of the boat, her legs a little unsteady, but her heart lighter than it had been in months. The moment her feet hit solid ground, she felt a small sense of triumph, as though she had just crossed an invisible line, one that she hadn't thought she'd be able to cross. Jaden helped steady her, a grin on his face. "How'd that feel?" Elizabeth paused, considering the question. The words that came out of her mouth surprised her. "It felt like the ocean wasn't my enemy anymore. It's just part of the world, like everything else." Jaden nodded, his smile widening. "You're getting there." The next few days were quiet, filled with simple moments. Walking along the beach, writing a few more pages of her memoir, and spending time with Jaden. But one morning, a call from her publisher shook her from her routine. "Elizabeth, this is Diane from Beacon Press. I've read the latest chapters you sent, and we think you're ready. It's time to talk about a launch date." Elizabeth stared at her phone for a long moment. The book was real now. It wasn't just her therapy. It was about to be something public. She had spent so much time writing, processing, and then trying to avoid the inevitable, sharing her story with the world. Now it was happening. "Are you still there?" Diane's voice came through again, bringing Elizabeth back to the moment. "Yeah, I'm here. I didn't realize it was that close." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. The way you've written your story, it's raw. It's real. And it's going to help so many people. It's not just about your shark attack, Elizabeth. It's about resilience. It's about learning to live after something that shakes you to your core. People need to hear that." Elizabeth swallowed hard, the weight of the words sinking in. "I didn't expect it to feel like this," she said quietly. "I thought maybe I could just finish writing and walk away. But now it's real. I'm going to have to stand by it." "And you will," Diane reassured her. "It'll be scary, yes, but it's also incredibly empowering. The world is ready to hear your story." Elizabeth closed her eyes, letting the silence settle in. For a moment, the anxiety bubbled up again, the fear of being exposed, of being seen in ways she wasn't sure she was ready for. But then she thought of the ocean, of how she had faced it head-on. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice steady. "Let's do it." The book launch came just a few weeks later. Elizabeth stood in front of a packed room in a local bookstore, the smell of ink and paper filling the air. The shelves were lined with books about survival, triumph, and resilience. She had written one of those books now, her story, her truth. Jaden stood at the back of the room, his eyes watching her with quiet pride. And as she looked out at the crowd, the words came easier than she expected. "Thank you all for being here today. This book is my story, yes, but it's also about the ocean and what it teaches us. About fear, about strength, and about finding our way back to ourselves." Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself, finding the courage to continue. "I don't have all the answers, but I'm learning, and maybe that's enough for now." As she spoke, the room fell silent, hanging on every word, and Elizabeth realized, as she had with the ocean, that sometimes the hardest part wasn't facing the thing that terrified you, it was learning how to live with it. And as the applause began to rise, she knew she had come a long way. She was finally standing in her truth, strong and unshaken. Guastomini.